Everyone, Lilith here. Welcome to another competitive Pokemon video. Today we're talking about GSC 10U, a tier with 7 legal Pokemon. Now, this is basically the viable team. Like the only things that you can really change out are this Metapod, either its item or replace it with Caterpie. But these 5 Pokemon and their movesets and items are locked in. So, let's explain this to you a bit. So, first off, the top 2 Pokemon are Weedle and Kakuna. There are 2 main leads, Weedle and Wobbuffet. Wobbuffet has the option of you go for Safeguard immediately, and we'll talk about the benefits of that later. Weedle is good because you are threatening to get a poison off if they lead with anything other than Weedle or Kakuna. You don't lead Kakuna because if they lead Wobbuffet or Ditto, they go first and either transform into you or set up Safeguard, and you don't want that, but Weedle outruns Wobbuffet and Ditto. So, as you can see, the moves available in this tier are terrible. Like, nothing gets good moves. And that means that this 30% chance to poison the target that Poison Sting has is your main source of damage in the tier. So, if one of your Pokemon gets poisoned, that's almost an instant loss. Metapod is salvageable, but if Ditto, Magikarp, or especially Wobbuffet is poisoned, that's basically GG's unless you can poison one of your opponent's Pokemon as well. And that is why every point of HP on Weedle and Kakuna matters. Because they don't take a lot of damage from each other. They take 10 damage. Weedle versus Weedle is 10 damage on average. Kakuna versus Kakuna is even less. I don't remember exactly what it is. So these gold berries are 3 to 5 more turns on the battlefield. And that's very valuable. So Weedle and Kakuna, in addition to being able to poison opponents, they cannot be poisoned. That means they typically will fight themselves. And while that is an option, there is merit to fighting Weedle or Kakuna with something else. Mainly because every point of health on Weedle or Kakuna is valuable, means that if you can deal damage to their Weedle or Kakuna in exchange for damage on one of your other 4 Pokemon, that is a good deal. However, if one of your other 4 Pokemon gets poisoned, then that sucks for you. So it's a risk-reward thing of, do you risk getting poisoned for extra turns to hit the Weedle or Kakuna while preserving health on your own Weedle and Kakuna? And that's kind of where this metagame comes from. Because, the legal Pokemon list is stupid. It's 7 Pokemon, only one of which even, 2 of them get a full 4 moves. It's, however, it's very tactical, actually, which is kind of weird. It's very slow-paced because there's no damage. Oh, I should also mention, Leftovers is banned because if Leftovers were allowed, battles would just go on forever every time, because Magikarp is the only Magikarp with Flail is really I believe the only thing that can out-damage Leftovers recovery. I mean, I guess Ditto with Struggle can do it. I don't know. But even if it doesn't take forever, it would often hit the 1,000-turn mark. Even without Leftovers, these battles typically go on for a few hundred turns. But now, you'll see that Magikarp and Wobbuffet are holding Poison Cure Berries. This is so they get a chance to... This is a safety net so they can attack into Weedle or Kakuna. Weedle and Kakuna are holding Gold Berries because those restore 30 HP, which is again, like I said, an extra 3 to 5 turns on the battlefield. So basically, the main tactic is who has more health on Weedle or Kakuna. I'd say the battles go in 3 phases. The first phase is the Weedle and Kakuna phase. The second phase is the Magikarp and Metapod / Caterpie phase, and then third is the Ditto and Wobbuffet phase. Battles pretty much always just go with each of those pairs having a turn being the star of the show. Like, at first, Weedle and Kakuna are the best counters to each other and to themselves because they don't have to worry about being poisoned. However, you want to preserve at least one of these to go into the next phase, which typically starts when like 3 of the 4 poison types are knocked out from like both teams, or like both Weedles are gone and both Kakunas are low on HP. Like, that's typically when phase 2 starts. And so the ways you can do that are, well, the main way you can do that is Wobbuffet Safeguard. For 5 turns, protects user's party from status. This means for 5 turns, you can't be poisoned. And if you can't be poisoned, that means you can switch something in to Weedle or Kakuna that safely. This will typically be either Ditto or Magikarp. Ditto has 16 transform PP. Well, that seems good because Metal Powder boosts your defense and special events even while transformed. You have 48 base HP. You kind of don't want to transform as Ditto. Well, you do. You want to use up all your transform PP. And the reason for that is, while Ditto transformed into another Pokemon is good, Ditto using Struggle is the strongest offensive threat in the tier. Seriously. It has the highest base attack in the tier, and it's not close. Caterpie's is base 30. And that means, and Struggle is base 50 power, whereas Tackle, Bubble, and Poison Sting are all less than that. Flail can be higher than that, but also Magikarp has 10 base attack. So, like, and also Flail is only stronger than that when Magikarp is at low health, and that means you only get a few high-powered flails off. So if Ditto can run out of Transform PP and still have decent health left, that's really good. So if you can get Ditto in against Weedle or especially Kakuna, Kakuna's better because Ditto outruns it. Typically, if you're using a Weedle or Kakuna against the opponent's Weedle, you want to String Shot turn 1. So that your Ditto your Wobbuffet and your Kakuna can outrun them. Yeah. Okay. But anyway. So. One thing I should mention. The builder thinks Poison Sting, String Shot, and String Shot are incompatible with Harden on Kakuna. That's only true in Gen 1. In Gen 2, they are not. However, if Kakuna had access to Harden because it can't be poisoned and can boost its defense to crazy levels, it would be so insanely broken that I'm just like, yeah, this mistake can remain. I don't care. Like, yeah, it's not cartridge accurate, but like, so what? Like, the tier is better off with it not having Harden. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off on tangents a lot. You send in a Ditto against either a String-Shotted Weedle or a Kakuna. And because Safeguard's up, you don't get poisoned on the switch. You don't take a lot of damage because your stats are good and you have Metal Powder, and also because it's Poison Sting and has 15 base power. And then you click Transform. Now, if you transform into the Weedle or Kakuna, even like 1 or 2 times, that is a massive advantage because that is 5 turns of Poison Stinging that they have to just stay in and tank, or they are risking getting a Pokemon poisoned without the benefits of taking your Weedle or Kakuna's health down. Which means you get to chip down Weedle and Kakuna. They chip down your Ditto, but like you have your Bulkio, you don't care. Like, health on Ditto is not as valuable as health on Weedle or Kakuna. So basically, you click Transform. they cannot stay in. So they have to switch into either Ditto, Magikarp, Metapod, or Wobbuffet. Switching in Metapod is, or Caterpie. Switching in Caterpie if they have one is bad because you're giving them, because Caterpie is actually a pretty strong attacker, and it's not as threatening as Poison Sting poisons, but you also don't want to allow them to use 5 Caterpie tackles for free, basically for free either. Okay. So, yeah. Okay, let's see. So they have to send in either Metapod, Magikarp, Ditto, or Wobbuffet. If they send in Magikarp, they're trying to get their Magikarp's health down safely so they can flail. Generally, if they do that, you want to switch in either your own Magikarp or Wobbuffet. And Wobbuffet is interesting because, well, we'll get to the Wobbuffet Magikarp interaction later. But yeah, if they switch in Metapod, you have to be careful because Hardens plus Metal Powder, you can cause your defense stat to overflow, and that's really bad. Generally, if they send in Metapod, they're typically going to Harden first, so you'll just want to send in your Weedle or Kakuna and start Poison Stinging again, because they'll almost always switch out Metapod there, and that's 1 free Poison Sting. And getting off just 1 extra Poison Sting is really good, because every Poison Sting either chips down Weedle or Kakuna or threatens to poison something. Unless you blunder and let them transform into Weedle or Kakuna. That's bad. If they transform into Wobbuffet, if you transform into Wobbuffet, just switch out. Again, you probably switch into Weedle or Kakuna. They're going to safeguard. Actually, no, you don't. Because they're going to safeguard there. So you want to send in your own Wobbuffet so you can safeguard. And then you'll also often end up in a situation, a loop of of everyone sending in Wobbuffet, safeguard, sending in Ditto, transform, sending it, and it just goes on for a while because both people are using that as a chance to use up Ditto's transform PP. You can break that by sending in a Magikarp or a Metapod, and while they have a Wobbuffet in, and just attacking. Magikarp especially is good against attacking Wobbuffet because Wobbuffet can't safely counter because you have Bubble. In fact, Wobbuffet has Mirror Coat. Well, 1, because the only alternative is Destiny Bond, but 2, because it Bubble. That's the only special attack in the tier. So generally, what Wobbuffet wants to do against Magikarp is a Mimic. Because if Wobbuffet gets an attacking move, even non-stab Bubble, it's non-stab Bubble off of 33 base special attack is actually on the stronger side, because basically everything in the tier has higher defense than special defense. And 20 base power is, it's better than Poison Sting. It's worse than Tackle, but now if Wobbuffet can mimic Tackle, that's even better. If Wobbuffet can mimic Flail, that's not that great. So generally, Magikarp will splash to get you to mimic a useless move. The splash gives you but if you predict that, you can switch in a poison type and then try to poison their Magikarp. So you're seeing the mind games. There's levels to these mind games that you have to play in the tier, and it's really interesting actually. It's way more interesting than you'd think of for a tier where the team building options are 1 slot that's either Caterpie or Metapod, and also which of 2 Pokemon do you want to lead with. Yeah. So, and finally, let's talk about Magikarp versus the poison types, and then we can go on to what happens once the poison types are almost gone. So, Magikarp, as you can once again, it has a poison cure berry. That means that it gets a freebie. Now, Magikarp, you want your HP to go lower because Flail's base power increases that way, and Flail is a good progress maker. You don't get it many flails off, but it actually doesn't take that long for Flail to become stronger than Tackle. There's also a very strange mechanic in Gen 2 only, where Flail will always get the maximum damage roll and never get a critical hit for some reason. That makes Magikarp's Flail a bit more of a consistent attack, like you know exactly how much damage it's going to do against each Pokemon depending on where your health is. And Magikarp is also faster than everything else. Bubble is also really good, especially against Kakuna, because it bypasses that high, at least for this tier defense. So, Magikarp overall, behind a Safeguard is very good. Even not behind a Safeguard with the Poison Cure Berry, you typically will want to at least let Magikarp attack the Weedle or Kakuna for as long as the Poison Cure Berry is still there. You'll want to switch out after that, but the damage it can do to especially Kakuna relative to everything else is worth it. Because a stab special move hurts, and not a lot hurts this Kakuna. Magikarp is sort of the best immediately threatening offensive threat. Because Ditto would struggle, but you have to actually get there. Caterpie can be pretty offensively threatening due to Tackle's amazing 35 base power. Whoa. But Caterpie also has the flaws of just being worse than everything else, so you typically aren't going to run it. If you do run it, Caterpie you typically play pretty recklessly with because it doesn't have the longevity of everything else, which is it always replaces Metapod, and kind of the idea is that you just hit the poison types with Tackle a bunch, you let yourself get poisoned, you'll run a Poison Cure Berry, and just get a ton of damage on Weedle or Kakuna to hopefully allow your Weedle or Kakuna to survive, because Pokemon like Metapod, Ditto, Wobbuffet, and Magikarp are much more averse to getting poisoned. And you kind of just agree to play the end game down a Pokemon in exchange for having more presence in the middle game with the threat to poison. It's interesting. I personally gravitate towards Metapod. Most people do, but it's definitely worth at least considering trying out Caterpie. Anyway, enough about Caterpie. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling. I'm just going into this completely unscripted. So basically that's how Weedle and Kakuna manage. So what happens when you've lost Weedle and Kakuna, they have a Weedle or Kakuna left? Well, typically that Weedle or Kakuna will be out in front. You're gonna want to send in if Wobbuffet still has its Poison Cure Berry, or if it's a Kakuna, you send Wobbuffet in Safeguard. In fact, generally you can also send in Magikarp. If it's low on HP, enough on HP to just be killed by Magikarp, you send in Magikarp. If you can't kill it immediately, you're gonna want to Safeguard with Wobbuffet. You can also, with Kakuna or with a string-shotted Weedle, send in Ditto to transform. But generally, you're going to want to just throw caution to the wind and just get rid of it as soon as possible. You just attack it. Especially with Magikarp, because it's faster, you just go for the attack and try to get rid of it. It will, assuming you played well and didn't get insanely unlucky, they'll only have one of their poison types left, and it'll be on pretty low health. So, yeah. And if you won that, and you're the only one with a poison type left, then what you're going to want to do is try to preserve it. Don't send it in unless you know you're getting a poison sting off when Safeguard is not up. Like that thing, like any turn a Weedle or Kakuna can poison sting against a non-Weedle, non-Kakuna, you have a chance to just like win the game. So so if you have a Weedle or Kakuna, if you have a poison type and they don't, you want to preserve it and choose careful opportunities to attack it, and under no circumstances let Ditto transform into it. Under no circumstances. If your opponent does and you don't, try to keep safeguard up as much as possible. Use try and preserve Magikarp to be able to outrun it. If it's a Weedle, if it's a Kakuna, that's less important. And just try to attack it as many times as you can. Don't try to be clever like with switching around. Just get rid of it as soon as you can. But what happens when all the poisons are gone? Then we end up in an interesting state where the threat of poison isn't there anymore. So how do you make progress now? Well, the answer is Magikarp. Because Magikarp can tackle, flail, bubble. It's fast, it's good. Now, Magikarp's bubble really threatens Metapod in particular. I've already talked about how it can play around Wobbuffet. It's actually, Ditto is like a chance for it to get into low health. Like, Magikarp is really solid overall. However, it doesn't have a lot of longevity. So you don't often want to switch Magikarp in to anything that can attack you. So if it's a Wobbuffet, you can switch in. If it's a Ditto, you can switch in, but it's a bit iffy. If it's a Caterpie or Metapod, don't, because you want to Magikarp to get as many attacks off as possible. The Poison Cure Berry is better than the Gold Berry because it gives you a free shot of against the poisons. But yeah. Now, one Metapod is another interesting Pokemon. So it has Harden, which once Magikarp is removed, and especially once as well as the poison types on the opponent's team, which typically the two poison types and Magikarp are the first three Pokemon to go down, at least on a Metapod team. On a Caterpie team, Caterpie will often go down pretty early as well. And once they're all gone, Metapod can just set up a bunch of Hardens and just stall. And that's really nice. Now, Scope Lens is so that you have an increased chance to crit. It's a 1 in 4 chance to crit. And that's for when you're fighting an opposing Metapod or a Ditto, because they'll have a bunch of Harden boosts too, and the crit will ignore that. Metapod's item is much more flexible. There's merit to running Poison Cure Berry, there's merit to running Gold Berry, but Scope Lens to me just feels best overall. So, now I mentioned the third phase, Ditto and Wobbuffet. Now, you want your Ditto to run out of PP. You want your Wobbuffet to not run out of PP, especially counter. Because Struggle is very threatening, but Wobbuffet's counter neutralizes Struggle. So generally, you want to run Ditto out of PP eventually, but you also want to stall out the Wobbuffet's counter to at least down to 10 PP or below first. And one important interaction to note is that if you use Transform against a transformed Pokemon, it will fail. And because it fails, you can still uses up a PP, but you aren't transformed and you don't end up with 5 PP of every move the opponent has. So you can transform again and again and again. So sending your Ditto in against an already transformed Pokemon is great. And it's great, and because it allows you to use up PP safely, especially if it's you switch in a Ditto and then they transform into your Ditto. That's a free transform. Now they're going to switch out, but that means you get to do a free transform into something nice, like usually a Wobbuffet or maybe a Magikarp. And finally, the final interaction to note worthy is Wobbuffet is almost always the last Pokemon standing. If it doesn't get poisoned, that massive HP makes it outlast everything else. You want to have more PP than the opponent, because if you have more PP than the opponent, they start struggling and you start countering the struggles and you win unless there's a massive HP disparity. So that's kind of how the end games are played. Waste Wobbuffet's PP. Magikarp is good for that because it tempts them into using Mimic. Sending in a Weedle or Kakuna a lot is good for that because they have to safeguard. So you just burn through the opponent Wobbuffet's PP, and I mean, it has 120, so it takes a while. And you want their Wobbuffet to be struggling and your Ditto to be struggling, but not the other way around. And that's the tactic of the end game, and generally speaking, Ditto will just break through most of the teams, eventually go down to recoil. You'll be left with Wobbuffet and Metapod. The Metapods will go down, and then if you played well, remember, the more wall break, all the wall breaking you did is just to make them have to use Wobbuffet more because another Pokemon is either fainted or has to switch out to be preserved. And the more they use Wobbuffet's PP, the better. Because basically, how this comes down to is once the end game is finished, who has more PP on their Wobbuffet? And whoever it is most likely wins. And overall, that's how this metagame is played. It's actually surprisingly fun. At least I think it is. It's a pretty weird metagame. But it's definitely not weird in a bad way. So, yeah, see you in the next video.